Hi guys, right, we're on to the last part of the BFG. It's been an awesome journey going through and reading these stories with you, and we've still got 2 weeks left of term, so we will have a brand new book on Monday that will last 2 weeks. I wonder what it'll be. I'll let you know on Monday. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into the last chapters rather than looking at some predictions because it's really exciting. So let's go straight into the story. Feeding time. While the giants were being captured, a tremendous bustle and hustle was going on back home in England. Every earth digger and mechanical contrivance in the country had been mobilised to dig the colossal hole in which the 9 giants would be permanently imprisoned. 10,000 men and 10,000 machines worked ceaselessly through the night under powerful arc lights, and the massive task was completed only just in time. The hole itself was about twice the size of a football field and 500 feet deep. The walls were perpendicular, and engineers had calculated that there was no way the giant could escape once he was put in. Even if all 9 giants were to stand on each other's shoulders, the topmost giant would still be some 50 feet away from the top of the hole. The 9 giant-carrying helicopters hovered over the massive pit. The giants, one by one, were lowered to the floor, but they were trussed up, and now came the tricky business of releasing them from their bonds. Nobody wanted to go down and do this because the moment the giant was freed, he would be sure to turn on the wretched person who had freed him and gobbled him up. As usual, the BFG had an answer. I told you before, giants has never eaten giants, so I was going down and I shall untie them myself, but I can say Rack Jobbington. With thousands of fascinated spectators, including the Queen, peering down into the pit, the BFG was lowered on a rope. One by one, he released the giants. They stood up, stretched their stiffened limbs, and started leaping about in a fury. Why is he putting us down here in this gobsucking hole? They shouted at the BFG. Because he was guzzling human beings, the BFG answered. I was always warning you not to do it, and I was never taking the titch's bit of notice. In that case, I think we was guzzling you instead. The BFG grabbed the dangling rope and was hoisted out of the pit just in time. The great bulging sack he had brought back with him from Giant Country lay at the top of the pit. What's in there? The Queen asked. The BFG put in an arm in the sack and pulled out a gigantic black and white striped object the size of a man. Snozcumbers, he cried. This is the repulsant Snozcumber, Magister, and that is all we is going to give these disgusting giants from now on. May I taste it? The Queen asked. Don't, Magister, don't, cried the BFG, tasting a trog filth and pig scribble. With that, he tossed the Snozcumber down to the giants below. That's your supper, he shouted. Have a munch of that. He fished out more Snozcumbers from the sack and threw them down. The giants below howled and cursed. The BFG laughed. Serves them right, left and centre, he said. What will we feed them when the Snozcumbers are all used up? The Queen asked him. They've never been used up, Magister, the BFG answered. I was also bringing in the sack a whole bunch of Snozcumber plants, which I was given, with your permission, to the royal gardener that puts in the soil. Then we was having an everlasting supply of the repulsant food to feed these thirsty blood giants on. What a clever fellow you are! You're not very educated, but you'll be really nobody's fault, I can see that. The author. Every country in the world that had been in the past visited by these foul man-eating giants sent telegrams and congratulations and thanks to the BFG and Sophie. Kings and presidents and prime ministers and rulers of every kind showed the enormous giant and the little girl with compliments and thank yous, as well as sorts of medals and presents. The ruler of India sent the BFG a magnificent elephant, the very thing he'd been wishing for all his life. The king of Arabia sent a camel to them each. The Lama of Tibet sent them a llama each. Wellington sent them 100 pairs of wellies each. Panama sent them some beautiful hats. The king of Sweden sent them a barrel full of sweet and sour pork. Jersey sent them pullovers. There's no end to the gratitude of the world. The Queen herself gave orders that a special house with tremendous high ceilings and enormous doors should immediately be built in Windsor Great Park next to her own castle for the BFG to live in, and a pretty little cottage was put up next door for Sophie. The BFG's house was to have a special dream storing room with hundreds of shelves in it where he could put his beloved bottles. What is more, he was given the title of Royal Dream Blower. He was allowed to go galloping off to any place in England on any night of the year to blow his splendid fizz wizards in through the windows to sleeping children. And letters poured into his house by the million from children begging him to pay them a visit. Meanwhile, tourists from all over the globe came flocking to gaze down in wonder at the 9 horrendous man-eating giants in the Great Pit. They came especially at feeding time when the Snozcumbers were being thrown down to them by the keeper. It was a pleasant pleasure to listen to the howls and growls of horror coming up from the pit as the giants began to chew upon the filthiest tasting vegetable on earth. There was only one disaster. 3 silly men who had drunk too much beer for lunch decided to climb over the high fence and surrounding the pit. Of course they fell in. There were yells of delight from the giants below, followed by the crunching of bones. The headkeeper immediately put on a big notice saying, "It is forbidden to feed the giants," and after that, there were no more disasters. The BFG expressed a wish to learn how to speak properly, and Sophie herself, who loved him as she would a father, volunteered to give him lessons every day. She even taught him how to spell and to write sentences. And he turned out to be a splendid, intelligent pupil. In his spare time, he read books. He became a tremendous reader. He read all of Charles Dickens, whom he no longer called Darl's Chickens, and all of Shakespeare and literally thousands of other books. He also started to write essays about his own past life. And Sophie read some of them. She said, "These are very good. I think perhaps one day you should become a real writer." "Oh, I would love that," cried the BFG. "Do you think I could?" "I know you could," Sophie said. "Why didn't you start writing a book about you and me?" "Very well, I'll give it a try." So he did. He worked on it hard, and in the end, he completed it rather shyly. He showed it to the Queen. The Queen read it aloud to her grandchildren. And then the Queen said, "I think we ought to get this book printed properly and published so the other children can read it." This was arranged, but because the BFG was a very modest giant, he wouldn't put his own name on it. He used somebody else's instead. But where, you might ask, is this book that the BFG wrote? Well, it's right here. You've just finished reading it. Wow, guys, that's the end of the BFG. And it turned out, actually, Roald Dahl is the BFG. Brilliant. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. And I can't wait to start a new story with you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye.